Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with Delaware's top minds and leaders who share their perspectives in ways that help advance First Aid Educate's mission, which is to build capacity, raise awareness, and elevate school board leadership. And today, we are so fortunate to be joined by Michelle Taylor, who is the president and CEO of the United Way of Delaware. Now, for more than 20 years, Michelle has been a steadfast leader, largely committed and a huge presence in the community, tackling some of the biggest challenges that Delaware is facing. And under her guidance, the United Way has implemented statewide strategies, which is no small feat, to improve third grade literacy, prepare young people for college and for the workforce, and to help families achieve financial stability. One of the most amazing things that Michelle has done was during a very challenging time when COVID-19 had pretty much shut down the world, but her leadership was instrumental in rallying resources to meet the most urgent needs. And she spearheaded efforts to raise millions of dollars that led to food and shelter and other critical services. But beyond these frontline, high visibility initiatives that Michelle's led, she's done many, many other things to transform Delaware, including heading the Delaware Racial Equity and Social Justice Collaborative, which organizes around 200 grassroots organizations. She's worked on the Governor Carney's Law Enforcement Accountability Task Force, and her leadership really has allowed us to create vision and a sense of urgency. So I'm so excited to have Michelle as our guest today. I'm excited to give you an opportunity to meet her if you haven't and hear her passion and understand more about how her leadership has shaped Delaware and is setting us up for a great future. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you.
Me too. So I gave sort of a great big overview, right? But I'm just curious for you, what are the key moments in your career that have really shaped how you view leadership?
Oh man, that's a good one. So I would just say, you know, I take it all the way back, by the way, to my days as a teenager working at McDonald's on Philadelphia Pike. I was taught about customer service and about delivering great customer service and doing it timely. And I look back now and I did not realize it then that I had been promoted, right, to crew chief. So I was in the supervisory role and I was supervising my friends and adults and my sister. And I was just given an opportunity early on to have someone sew into me. And that's just
Mm,
been continual over the time. My first job out of college, I had an amazing boss, Chris Keene at HBCS, who sewed into me and really helped to give me guardrails and feet. When you first come out of college, right, you have a degree and you know the basics of accounting. My background is accounting, but you don't still have all the experience that you need. And having good mentors and coaches along the way that kept giving me assignments and kept challenging me and kept being the wind and pushing me out had been just a continual path along my career. Susan Lloyd did the same thing for me at Delaware Hospice and allowed me to be able to fly even more and challenged me, but also taught me everything that I needed to know to be an effective leader within hospice care. And then last but not least, here at United Way, which I have celebrated my 25th year this past January, that I've had amazing leaders from those I reported to, but just amazing board chairs. You talk about the importance of board
mm-hmm,
members.
mm-hmm.
I had Dr. Bob Laskowski that hired me from the beginning, or Tim Constantine, Rick Deadweiler. I now have Brian Norrie, John D'Agostino. I've had Connie Bond Stewart. I've had amazing board chairs that also gave me wisdom and guidance and just allowed me to fly, but also helped me to be able to dust off when I fell and things
Mm-hmm.
didn't go as well, and could encourage me and send me back out in the community, because I don't have to tell you that leading, particularly in environments that are constantly changing don't necessarily come with manuals that tell us
Right.
exactly how to lead, right? We get trained on it. We read everything that we can from Harvard business reviews to what's going on with Gallup and engaging your employees, but putting it to work is a whole different level.
Sure. Yeah, no, there are fabulous points in there. What I really loved was sort of the walkthrough of those individuals, and I think it's a blessing. It's good fortune to have people who are there and who stand up and who help, make the way for someone to go out into the world and to make a contribution. And what it brought to my mind was to bring it back to sort of just the K-12 education is it's the same thing kind of that teachers do when they're in the classroom, right? They're pouring into the student, they're trying to help them learn and grow, and then you pay that forward. We're all like it's a constant cycle of like someone helps us get a little bit further, so we help someone else, and then that person does a great thing. And I just think it's beautiful that you remember them, each of those moments and how they helped you. It makes it very personal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I am where I am. I am a part of who I am is because of the individuals who have sown in me. And have been so many pivotal moments. I mean, I think there are individuals, Susan Lloyd and I talk about this, that she saw something in me to be an executive director, right? A president CEO of an organization when I didn't even see that in myself.
Sure. Mhm.
And so sometimes, right, you have to, some people, as we said, will help you to um, figure out how to bloom where you're planted
Mhm.
and to give you some of those legs and those components that you might not know exist. Or the last thing I would say is just given the opportunity. I would probably say
Mhm.
the most pivotal opportunity I had was when I was promoted from chief financial officer to chief operating officer,
Mhm.
and which got me out of the realm of just doing finances, right?
Mhm.
Finances is
Mhm.
a lot behind the scenes, and chief operating officer was too, but it also began to propel me to be more in the front line of the business model.
Mhm. Mhm.
And having that opportunity to be able to see and to lead across the organization, both internally and externally, really was the game changer, I would say, for my career.
Wow. I love this bloom where you're planted. That's a great notion to take away, because it's not always easy. Sometimes we get great soil, sometimes we get rocky soil, and
That's
try to be
right.
able to do whatever we can do wherever we are. And I also liked what you mentioned about, yeah, how these, the board chairs. I do think I'd say the same about my board. I mean, they're incredible and they're so helpful. And it's the same thing that I think First Aid Educate really, that's our mission, is to ensure that the local school boards have the capacity to be able to support the superintendent. And we do see it as a supportive relationship. It's not one, there is a governance function, right? I mean, there's an oversight, but that's not a negative thing. That's never
No,
really a gotcha. Everyone wants success. We're all fighting for the same thing.
absolutely. I think people don't
Yeah.
realize just how critical the boards are to the
Yep.
success of the organization, and particularly the success of the leadership of the organization. And as I said,
Mhm.
I can't speak for everyone else's experience. I can just tell you
Mhm.
I've had an amazing experience, not just for my
Mhm.
board chairs, but my board members who are passionate about the mission of the organization, right?
Mhm.
Really willing to roll up their sleeves, but more importantly, to give just their intellect, right? To be
Mhm.
able to give their wisdom and guidance. Like, right
Mhm.
now we are talking about just the change that's happening with all the executive orders and just
Sure.
the environment. None of us have been in this environment
Innocent.
before.
Yep.
None of us
Yep.
was in a COVID environment before.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
we as leaders also have to be able to have good relationships, good working relationships, good trust with
Mhm.
our board, where hopefully it's mutual, where we can share information and seek out. For me, I
Yep.
seek out the counsel of my board because
Yep.
I don't know it,
Yep.
all nor have I lived
Sure.
the road that we're about to pave. And so
Right.
I want some of the best thinking to help me to make good, sound business
Yep.
decisions.
Yep. Yep, I think that's excellent advice. I agree, and I think um, normalizing the fact that it's impossible for one person to know everything and to lean on each other and to say, I don't know what to do. That's the best leadership move is to be like, look, this is where I am. What do you have to add? Because the more heads and the more critical thinking and that generosity that boards demonstrate, um, I think that's how we move things ahead.
Yeah. And I think having a board too that's willing then to back the leader
Hmm.
of the organization, right?
Yep.
Because these jobs also, while they come with praise, they also come with criticism.
Sure.
It's easier to look from the outside in. And
Sure.
so having board members that will help to do that blocking and tackling
Hmm.
for you in some ways, right? Stand in front of you
Yeah.
in order to be able to take darts that may come occasionally and to be able to defend it in the sense of these were sound collective decisions.
Decisions,
A
exactly.
lot of times, right? It doesn't say, oh, this is what Michelle decided. No, this is what we
Right.
decided that's best for United Way of Delaware. And that's when right, that you have, I would say,
Mhm.
like a um, good volunteer group of
Mhm.
individuals.
Yep. That's an excellent point too about the collective decision. But I wanted to ask you just before we go to the next segment about public education. But I know you care deeply about literacy, equity, and financial stability. So why are those issues particularly important to you?
Yeah, great question. So, just as a mother, myself, right, and now I'm a grandmother, I understand the importance of education, right? And education being the game changer. I grew up in an environment, right, where people said education is going to be the key that unlocks a lot of doors to having financial stability and financial empowerment and wealth building. And so, as I have lived that out myself with my own kids, trying to figure out how to navigate, I'm proud to say,
Mhm.
I'm a product of the public education system here in Delaware. My kids are products of the Delaware education system here in Delaware. And I've said it's always worked, right? When the schools do their part and the parent does their part and the child does their part. It's like a three-legged stool,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And early on, I also saw where I always knew my kids would be fine because they had an advocate. Not every child has that. And
Right.
so from years, right, I personally, as just part of I think my civic role, part of just being a good community advocate, I was speaking up for those that were
Mhm.
disenfranchised,
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
right that needed more supports, and I think that's where it just stems from, right? Is recognizing that
Mhm.
everyone doesn't have the same amount of resources or advocacy or infrastructure
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
just the knowledge to
Yeah.
be able to fight a system. I mean, I've had to fight a system. It hasn't been a perfect education system. It wasn't for my kids. There's many times I had to go to bat for them where I thought that
Mhm.
they were being discriminated against, right? If I thought that they were treated unfairly. But on the flip side, we valued education enough to say that, look, extracurricular activities is a privilege in our house, right? It's not
Mm.
your right. And so education comes first. And so when you do what you're supposed to do, we'll do as parents what we're supposed to do, which is
Mhm.
also that meant holding the school accountable for what they were supposed to be doing,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
if one of those didn't work, right? So I'm not a person that says, "Oh, the school was always wrong." No, if my child was wrong, my child was wrong.
Right.
And if our values were thrown off in our household, how do we level set that?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
I just see the possibility because I don't think my journey as a parent and with my kids was anything special or out of the ordinary. I think we were just a
Mhm.
normal middle class family, Christian based, that was
Mhm.
trying to teach our kids the right values.
Mhm, mhm. I that it's so much, great insight into what works, in that answer, so thank you so much. I mean, it's such a pleasure to have these conversations with you. I mean, we're doing it now, but every time I have the opportunity to converse with you about something, I always take away, things that, one, make me a little smarter, like this it is a three-legged stool. It's not all on one person. This is a shared sense of responsibility, and if one of those things is off, the system doesn't work. But I just hear such generosity of spirit in that answer, because you're saying, here's what I learned, here's what worked for me, here's what I saw, and then how can I give that away? How can I make that available for someone else? How can I use that, to have other people have the same access, um, to opportunities that you had working with an imperfect system,
That's right.
and I did want to. I'm glad that you mentioned, you started to talk about the public school system, because in our second segment, I really wanted to hear. I mean, you've had a front row seat with public education in Delaware for a long time, so kind of what's happened? How has it evolved? Where are we now? Is it better? Is it worse? Are we on the right I mean, setting aside all of the larger changes that are happening in the world, but just just
Oh
focusing on
my
Delaware.
gosh. That's a great question. I ask that sometimes as being a product of the public education system, right? So like as a student, right? For someone who
Mhm.
came up, man, I went to Stubbs Elementary School, right?
Mhm.
Went to Central Middle that doesn't exist anymore. I graduated from Concord High School. So when I think about my own education system, that I felt was fairly good, right? It got me into college and then it
Mhm.
got me into a career path, right? And I felt like, in the process, I got values and teachers that
Mhm.
generally cared about me. And I just ran into Mr. Ned Brown, who was my assistant principal at Concord High School, right?
Oh, wow.
And it was one of my teachers at Concord High School that kind of steered me in the direction of being an accountant because I was good at math. And so I think when I look back, I feel like that infrastructure was there and the supports. And so I do think about how that shifted from my own kids' experience, which was I earnestly believed in that three-legged stool.
Mhm.
And I believe that my kids could get a good education through public education, which I
Mhm.
would venture to say that they did based upon where they are,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And where they landed
Mhm.
up, right? And and I just say this all the time. And my kids never, when they went to college, they didn't need to take remedial. There was
Oh,
no
wow.
remedial
Mm.
math or
Uh-huh.
English
Uh-huh.
classes that they needed to be able to take. And again, I would tell you, I felt like my kids were average from
Mhm.
the system, but what we did do was maximize the system, meaning as a parent, I can't say enough about that parent piece or that
Mhm.
guardian piece that's in the life
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
kids.
Mhm.
I had my nephew live with me for 3 years. And during that time period, I had to go up to the school all the time, right? And had to meet with his teachers and I had to be online
Mhm.
and I had to figure out what was
Mhm.
going on. I decided
Mhm.
to take
Mhm.
his word or the teacher's word, right?
Uh-huh.
And so that engagement, if you work the system or
Mhm.
then the system works,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so I would then say you fast forward it to now. I'm not sure if it's any different or
Mhm.
what I think is different, honestly, is our value system. I
Mhm.
think what is different is how we show up in the schools and how we engage. I think COVID changed a lot for
Yeah.
our kids and our families over the last 4 years. I think the amount of trauma that
Mhm.
our kids experience now compared to maybe when we were coming up, which is interesting because I think back of it now and says like we had trauma too. They just didn't put a name on it,
Was
right?
that, yeah.
That was to
Yeah.
say like we grew up poor, we grew up right with just counting our meals and making sure how do we make
Mhm.
ends meet. But the community was different and the sense
Mhm.
of community was
Yeah.
different. This is
Yep.
when remember when I could discipline your child's
Exactly.
down the street
Yep.
was doing something wrong,
Yep.
and then the parent would discipline them, right?
Yeah.
For something
Yeah.
else. I had quickly tell you, one of those, I was driving home and one of 3 kids were walking down and one of them was throwing stones. They were throwing them at the mailbox. And I
Mhm.
stopped and I said, you really shouldn't do that. You think, and I'm
Mhm.
telling you, the little girl got right in my face in the window and was screaming and yelling at me.
Wow.
And so it's just the level it caught me off guard, but,
Sure.
it's just the level of disrespect to like,
Mhm.
that would have never
Sure.
happened when
Yeah.
we were growing up, or you
Right.
coulda did that if you wanted to, and
Yeah.
that's a whole different discussion, right, of how
Sure.
we discipline has changed
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
over the years, how I think how we were disciplined is now considered child abuse, and
Yeah.
so but in some ways, it kept people out of jail, and
Yep.
it kept us on a straight and narrow.
Yep. Yeah, I literally was telling someone that same story the other day of when we grew up, if your parents weren't there, but there were other people that were watching you. The community was watching. You had an expectation of how you were supposed to behave, and if you violated that, any one of the adults, had you knew they had the right to sort of correct you and pull you back. And I can remember when I started in public education, the same thing, feeling like, wow, there's a value system here, right? Like we've got to support it, we've got to keep it together. And today, it is exactly as you described, and I don't have the answer for it, but I miss and I mourn that loss of we all care about each other and we're all looking out for each other, and we gotta stay together because what one person does affects everybody else. Wow, that was a really powerful story, really powerful. But good for you that you still said something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Still a huge advocate of the public education system, right?
Yeah. So, and what do you think? You mentioned a couple things: COVID, the trauma. And there's a lot. I think it is labeled, more explicitly now. But we've got that challenge. We've got the discipline challenge. We've got a situation in Delaware where, on average, and I try to call this out because I think the average sometimes hides some of the most important members of the group that we need to be, of the children that we're educating. But for in between, and I'm not telling you statistics you don't know, but just for the audience's benefit to frame it, right now in Delaware, there's 4 out of every 10 kids in grades 3 through 8 that can read on grade level on
Mhm.
average, but it's lower when you look at the subgroups. And then there's 3 out of 10 that can do math. And we're 49th in terms of making up for COVID learning loss. So there are a lot of challenges right now that the public school system is facing. What are your thoughts on kind of, what might help? Is it extended learning time? What roles does the board play? Extracurricular
Mhm.
programs or after school
Mhm.
programs?
So, I can only tell you still from the outside looking in because I think
Mhm.
it's always a different perspective when you're sitting in the seat, right? Than from people sitting
Mhm.
outside. But what I do know from the education system, I still think it's very bureaucratic in the
Mhm.
sense that, um, a lot of mandates to maybe what people have to teach to. And
Mhm.
I don't know how much autonomy really that we give school chiefs, and school chiefs give principals, and then,
Mhm.
principals then thus their teachers. When I think about it from a business perspective, we're always talking about, engagement is so important, right? To having people show up to be their best self as your colleagues and how to get the best out of them. I don't know if the environments of teaching is the culture. I would say in the school walls, right, is one way. And then how does it really need to shift and change? And in some ways, is it so deep? How do you really bring someone in that, again, so that if the principal wants to change the culture of the school, that they're backed by the superintendent, thus backed
Sure.
by the board, so that if parents start complaining, remember, because that's the darts, right, that's
Mhm.
coming,
Yep.
that they back the person, right, with a
Mhm.
buffer versus, um, what I would call being wishy-washy, right, or standing on both sides of the fence. You gotta pick a
Yep.
side
Yeah,
and
yeah,
say,
yeah.
"This is really gonna be it," because I like to think that our teachers show up to work every day with the intent to educate our kids.
Yeah.
Principals show up every day, right, with the intent that says, how do they manage a school that
Mhm.
supports kids and parents and families and communities, and then
Mhm.
superintendents and chiefs. And so my sense of what needs to potentially we need to relook at is culture, right,
Mhm.
within the walls of the school, empowering the school leaders more to be able to
Mhm.
have some autonomy to be able to go do and be. And then how do you have it so that superintendents or school boards allow it to look different? Because if you and I manage a school within the same district and I'm the principal, we may have the ultimately end game, but if you got a way to get there that's different
Sure.
than the way that I have, I think, how do we support us to be able to do that and
Yep.
allow us a little time to grow and learn, which means
Mhm.
there'll be
Mhm.
some failures that's in there too along the
Right.
way, our grow and
Right.
learn. And then how does the school get behind supporting both of us, right? In that way, in that autonomy is different from trying to think that you got to have 12 principles and we all have to be alike and we all
Yeah,
have to be doing the same thing and we all
sure.
got to lead the same way. I don't think that's the way, given the fact that our kids may be different, our families may
Mhm,
be different, teachers are definitely different, and our teachers are our staff. So if you don't allow me to show up to give my teachers and pivot to what they need to keep them
mhm.
energized and going, and that accountability piece, right?
Yep.
I think that's what I'm really saying. So I do think there's something around autonomy. I think there's something around giving people letting go some of bureaucracy. I think the accountability, though, we all have to
Mhm,
agree what the end game is, right? So
mhm.
it can't be 12 different end games, but
Yeah.
how do we get there and how do we measure it? Um, and then the last thing that I'll just say is I don't not sure when we think about our school structure, to me, you hit on it now. If so many kids are behind, so we say the stats say up to third grades, kids learn to read and then they
Mhm.
read to learn. So starting
Yep.
in fourth grade.
Mhm,
But if we know that we've left 60% of our kids
mhm,
behind as soon as they come into fourth grade, we
mhm,
gotta then reshift, right? That means 60% of my kids can't read. I can't keep going with the norm. Like somehow you
mhm,
gotta figure out why don't we double down in fourth and fifth grade to really to catch
mhm.
kids up so that we can close that gap so that they can be prepared to read to learn, right?
Yep, yep, yeah,
Um, and so if we
1000%.
just read to um, some of the core elements that we need in education and we don't
Mhm,
shift and modify
mhm,
in
mhm.
really strong, meaningful ways, I think we lose a generation along the way.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think the stakes couldn't be higher. I think the autonomy that you're mentioning, with a focus on the shared goals, all fabulous points. And it brings me to the last topic I wanted to touch on with you today is you've done a really good job bringing people together and creating an organized, motivated coalition, a group of people that are focused towards something. So just to close, what are some strategies that you've found effective when you're trying to build belonging or deal with diverse voices? Because I think that was really inherent in a lot of what you were suggesting with your in the comments you just made. So how do people do that? How do you get people to kind of focus on the same thing but allow that diversity in terms of ways of getting there?
First of all, you gotta be very intentional.
Mhm.
I think second, I would say your skin has to be pretty thick, right? You gotta know
Mhm.
some of the ground rules up front, right? You gotta know
Mhm.
that it's not black and white, it's gonna be gray. But the big thing that we've been using over the last few years is really the collective impact model. And so how do you bring people around first around those shared
Mhm.
goals? Well, that's what keeps us to the table, right? We're fighting for more
Mhm.
kids to read by third grade. And then you could talk about then where's the shared metric? How will we measure our success? What do we
Yep.
know what that's going to look like? And get
Mhm.
us to be able to go there. It's those mutually reinforcing activities, which gets harder, Julia, that says you and I, we just did one around the spelling bee, right? To say
Mhm. Mhm.
bring what to the table, what you can, we bring to the table what we can. Each partner brings to the table what they each can or should, right? What's already in their wheelhouse, what
Mhm.
they're already great at. And if we're doing that in an organized way, then the outcome should be better, right? The outcome that we're getting to,
Right.
and we should be able to achieve it. But then it requires some communication, right? And I would say some conflict management and conflict resolution things because it's not going to be a perfect system. How do
Exactly.
we get intentional about allowing people's voices to be heard? Um, and I think it's going to be key because the issues that are confronting us locally, particularly
Mhm.
just stick with education, our topic here, is deep rooted and it's complex. And the reality is, we've been trying to fix it for years. And I also will just close with this closing comment. I say it all the time now. We got to think about the definition of insanity. Why do we keep doing the same things over and over and over
Yeah.
again and
Yeah.
expecting different results?
Mhm.
Why aren't we using the research? The research says here's best practices. The research says here's what works. And then a
Mhm.
lot of times we are doing the very opposite of what the research says, but yet we'll want to push research out. And so as a community, it means we have to care less about who gets credit.
Mm.
We got to check our egos when we come in the door. And we have to think about, right, the common good. Like what
Mhm.
is your goal? What is it we're
Yep.
really trying to achieve? That we are so sold out. I told my team
Mhm.
this morning, right? I'm so sold out and passionate about trying to get kids to read by the end of third grade. Right now, and it's like we can't not let summer not matter. We can't let
Mhm.
summer go without ensuring more of our kids are in structured learning. So while we keep beating on that drum, it may sound like a broken record to some, but that's
Mhm.
okay
Right.
because the reality is our kids are worth it.
Yep.
And we have to keep asking people to support the goals financially. And they may tell us no 6 times, and that's okay
Mhm.
because the kids are worth it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the fight is real, but we have to be, I think, very intentional and strategic and collaborative and
Mhm.
our approach to do it, but we also can't keep doing the same
Same.
things.
Yeah. Yep. Fabulous. Michelle, you've been just an incredible guest. As I said, I always do. I'm taking so many nuggets with me. I think your experience and your, your just how you approach the world has led to the success, and your success has made the lives of other people in Delaware better and helped us be able to move forward. I love the, just to sort of summarize, the bloom where you're planted, and that there's no manual for leadership. Um, this idea that the board is making a collective decision, so it's gonna, leadership comes with praise and criticism. We've all got to stand behind each other. And this, what you closed with too, about this collective impact model and being intentional and focus on the common good. You've given us so many gifts. Thank you for spending the time with us. I'm sure the audience enjoyed it. I would love to have you back.
I would love to come back and thank you for the invitation.
Sure. It's okay. Well, to our audience, thank you for joining us again. I'm Julia Kelleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate, and thanks for listening to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware Tomorrow. We'll see you soon.